Hi everyone, I'm Paige Abbott, registered psychologist in the province of Alberta. Thanks for joining me today. I wanted to talk about a question that comes up often, which is when do I need boundaries in relationships? The quick answer is always, with all relationships. We need them to be healthy, to be functional, and to take care of ourselves as well as the other person in relationship. Now, if you struggle with that answer, then chances are you've maybe had some misunderstanding of what boundaries really are. If you're thinking that boundaries mean a complete cutoff or a complete disengagement from somebody, that's not necessarily the case. So essentially, a boundary is just our kind of protective barrier. You can think of it like a fence on a property line. It's obviously not something that always, keeps people out. It's not impenetrable. There may be gates through which people can come, so we're still interacting, we're still having relationship, connection, and communication, but with parameters. So we're no longer fenceless, and anyone at any time can just wander onto our property and do whatever they'd like. We need to have those parameters there so that people have that understanding, and most importantly, we have that understanding of when it's okay for people to be in our space, whether that's emotional, financial, physical, or otherwise, and when it's not. Now, obviously, the difference between a literal fence on a property line and a boundary is that a boundary in a relationship is invisible. So it's not something that people can actually see like a fence on a property line. And a lot of people get caught up thinking that they have to basically clarify for people where those fences are, what they look like, and that they exist in their actual relationships. So a lot of time can be spent explaining, justifying, and trying to get the other person to understand where these boundaries are so that then they can be taken care of, so to speak. This is also a very common misunderstanding and misstep with boundaries, because fundamentally boundaries are our own to set. They're not something that other people need to know, need to understand, or even need to respect. What's fundamentally important is that we know what we need and also what we are prepared to do to reinforce that boundary and that need for ourselves. So if we have a need for how we're going to be treated in a relationship or just by people in general, and that is being violated or crossed, perhaps there's some disrespectful language, perhaps topics that we're not comfortable discussing keep getting brought up, then it's our responsibility as the individual to take action accordingly. So for some people, at some times, that might mean a complete disengagement from the relationship, but often that's a rare circumstance. More often than not, what it involves is a stepping back from that conversation, from that topic, just from that situation. So it doesn't mean a complete stepping out of the relationship. Now, if there's chronic and consistent violation of our boundaries, and we feel very impaired or having a hard time maintaining our own needs and taking action on that, then that is a critical time to evaluate your presence in that relationship, because it may not be a healthy place for you to be. So in those circumstances, there may be that need to step out of a relationship entirely, whether that's a friendship, a work relationship, a romantic relationship, even a family relationship. No relationship is protected from needing boundaries in it. And sometimes people will give more leeway in certain relationships than others, especially with family, thinking that because they're blood, because there's this kind of history component, that we don't need boundaries, or our boundaries can be more lax or different. And that's often the reason that people are ending up very frustrated, very hurt, and very struggling with their family relationships because their boundaries are so different and they've basically changed their internal parameters. But we really can't do that. So that's the sticking point. People are trying to convince themselves that they're okay with things that everywhere else they're not okay with. They're still not fundamentally okay with it in those family relationships either, but that becomes the story. So boundaries are an absolute necessity everywhere that we go with everything that we do. They can be very subtle. So it can even be, I'm trying to leave work at the end of the day and somebody's trying to strike up a conversation with me. I can tell that they want it to be a deeper conversation. A boundary may look like, politely kind of smiling, but not really engaging with the conversation. And then maybe just saying something to the effect of, it sounds like there's a lot going on there. Maybe we can talk about it another time. Let's book a time, or, if it doesn't seem important to come back to just recognize, yeah, thanks for sharing, but I do need to go now. So take care and I'll see you tomorrow or whenever. So moving out of a conversation, something as simple as that is an example of a boundary. And these are the things that for people who struggle with boundaries, they think, what's the big deal? I'll engage in that conversation. But those small violations add up to a huge impact on the person, because now you're starting to see, even if it's just a 5-minute window, now you're feeling aggravated. Now you're late. You're feeling behind. You're feeling trapped. There's an energy there that now we carry with us. And there's a chronic impact to that. If that keeps happening over and over and over again, that can severely impact people's mental, emotional, and relational health. So boundaries are so critical in relationships. They are a very challenging thing, and they often come with the feeling of guilt, especially when people aren't used to setting them initially. So really, I encourage people not to use that guilt as a sign that they're doing something wrong, but rather as an indication that they're doing something different. So the guilt is just an indicator that you haven't done this before, but that doesn't mean that it's not helpful or ultimately not in your best interests. So guilt, as you're moving from a lack of boundaries or limited boundaries to more boundaries, is going to likely be a part of the process. It's not something that you'll be able to swerve around. But again, trying to remind yourself that that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. You may get pushback from the people around you as you're trying to do things differently. Again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The lack of boundaries and non-existence of boundaries can really contribute to dysfunction on both sides of a relationship, not just with the person who struggled with boundaries, because a lack of boundaries can lead to enabling, dysfunction of many sorts. And so there's actually a gift in it for the other person involved as well, even if they're not open to that or really willing to receive that as a gift. People don't like change to be forced on them, so there is likely going to be some pushback. So when do we need boundaries? All of the time. What do we need those boundaries to be? That's unique and dependent on you. So that is where you will need some consultation with your intuition, with your feelings, with your supports, and perhaps even with some professional support to start to sort out where are some boundaries needed and would be important and beneficial in your day-to-day life and your relationships. So this is a really big topic, and I appreciate you spending some time on it with me today, but it is likely something you will have to keep exploring and delving into. So as a starting point, you may just want to map out the people and kind of the environments potentially in your life, and just looking at how are these contributing to health, and are there places where I'm feeling kind of violations, frustrated, irritated. Those are signs that there's something amiss there. There's likely a disconnect between what you need and what you're experiencing and what's happening. And then you may not be able to do the next part alone. You may need to talk with somebody about, okay, so what do I do now? How can I move towards greater authenticity and congruence in my actions as being reflective of what I need? Good luck in this. I absolutely love working with people on relationships and boundaries. It's certainly something that I know is challenging. And for myself, even as a mental health practitioner, I struggle with. It can be hard to speak up for yourself, whether through words or through action. It is difficult to see people not happy with that. It can be difficult to feel the guilt. It can be difficult to feel quote unquote selfish in taking care of yourself. But I know for me, I remind myself that it's not being selfish, that if I'm bringing kind of the worst parts of me to a situation or a relationship because my needs aren't being met, then what good is that to everybody involved, myself included? So there truly is a relational component to boundaries, even if it seems like there's not. So I do wish you all of the best. I hope that you will seek out some professional support and guidance if needed. And just a reminder that videos and self-management and self-help tools are not a substitute for professional assessment and treatment. If you are experiencing some troublesome symptoms, or even if you would just like some extra support in personal development and personal growth, I would strongly encourage you to seek out some support in your local area from a healthcare provider who feels like a good fit for you. Thanks so much for spending some time with me today. I wish you all the best in your journey of boundaries. Stay tuned. You may want to hit the notifications bell and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm putting up videos on a fairly regular basis around topics related to mental health, wellness, including emotions and relationships, which are some of my favorite things to talk about and explore. So take care and bye for now.